When I was in my mid-20s, I pulled graveyard shifts at a 7-Eleven. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills, and since I was still grinding through online school, I figured the long, quiet hours would give me time to knock out some coursework. Most nights, that theory held up. I was alone, the store was dead, and when the occasional customer wandered in, I'd just slide my laptop aside, ring them up, and get back to work. That night, though, it was different. It was cold, bitter. Rain pelted the glass in sheets, drumming out a rhythm that made the place feel even more hollow than usual. I liked nights like that. The worse the weather, the fewer people came in. I had my head buried in my laptop for almost 2 hours when the front door chimed. I looked up. A man stepped inside. He looked about 30, beard, short hair, the kind of guy you wouldn't glance at twice in a crowd. He moved slow, browsing the aisles like he had all the time in the world. Then, just as quietly as he arrived, he left, got back in his car and drove off without buying a thing. I didn't think much of it. People did weird stuff all the time. I just grabbed my laptop and kept on working. Half an hour later, headlights swept across the front windows. I glanced up. Same car. My stomach tensed. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe not. The man climbed out, walked in, and this time he came straight to the counter, moving faster now like he had a purpose. He barely looked at me, just asked, "Bathroom?" His voice was low, clipped. I pointed toward the back. Yeah, right over there." He nodded, turned, and disappeared inside. Now, I know people double back for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he changed his mind about grabbing something. Maybe he really needed to go. But something about it didn't sit right. Like an itch at the back of my brain I couldn't quite scratch. Minutes passed, then more. 5, 10, 15. The silence stretched, thick and unnatural. I wasn't about to be the guy who knocked. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Hey, buddy, you fall in?" But just as I was starting to get that gnawing sense that something wasn't right, blue and red lights splashed across the windows. Police cruiser rolled into the lot. The officer inside slowed as he passed the man's car, head tilted like he was really looking at it. Then he stopped, just parked right behind it, blocking it in. My pulse ticked up a notch. The cop climbed out, came inside, gave the place a once-over before his eyes landed on me. "You know who owns that car outside?" Something in his tone, the way his eyes flicked toward the restroom, sent a cold trickle down my spine. He wasn't just curious. He was worried. I pointed at the bathroom door. "Yeah, he's in there. Been a while." The officer didn't hesitate. He crossed the floor in 3 long strides and banged on the door, hard. "Sir, this is the police. Open up." No response. He tried the handle. Locked. His jaw tightened. And that's when I knew. Something was seriously wrong. The cop knocked, then pounded, then started yelling through the door, his voice clipped, sharp, the way someone talks when they already know something's wrong. Nothing. He turned to me, eyes narrowed. "You got a key?" My hands were shaking as I fumbled through the drawer under the counter, metal clinking against metal, until my fingers closed around it. I yanked it out, ran it over. He grabbed it, slid it into the lock, and twisted. The door swung open, gun raised. The room was empty. For a second, I just stood there, my brain refusing to process it. He went in. I know he went in. The officer turned to me, face like stone. "You're sure he never came out?" I nodded. He swept the room again, slower this time, his eyes tracking every inch. Then they flicked upward. The ceiling. It was one of those drop panel types, flimsy, easy to move. The kind that could hide a whole lot of secrets. The cop muttered something under his breath, then keyed his radio. Backup arrived within 15 minutes. It took another 5 for them to find him, wedged up in the crawl space like some twisted spider, waiting. They dragged him out, cuffed him, hauled him away. Turns out the guy had done some real bad things earlier that night. Bad enough that his face was already on police bulletins, his car already flagged. The kind of bad that makes the news, the kind that leaves people locking their doors extra tight and checking over their shoulders. The cop told me I was lucky. The people this guy had hurt before, they'd all been alone late at night just like me. walking home, working the graveyard shift. Vulnerable. Easy. They never figured out if he was just hiding or if he had something worse planned for me. Doesn't really matter, though. He's locked up now. I work security now. Mid-sized office building. Right in the heart of the city, where crime's just part of the scenery. You get used to it. Burglaries, break-ins, hell, half the places around here practically expect it. I usually have a partner, but this month, I was alone. They were still training the new guy, and honestly, I didn't mind. Being alone could get boring. Sure, but at least I didn't have to listen to someone yap all night. 2 weeks into my solo shifts, I was making my usual rounds when I noticed them. 2 guys, standing on the other side of the road, just far enough to stay in the shadows. They weren't talking, weren't smoking, just standing there, watching. At first, I told myself they were looking at the building, not me. But the next time I passed by, they were gone. I took a mental note, let it go. The next few nights were quiet. Then, toward the end of the week, I saw them again. Same place, same stance, same dead-eyed stare. This time, I didn't keep walking. I stayed put, pacing along the edge of the lot, making sure they saw me watching them back. 5 minutes passed before they finally turned and walked away. I stayed outside another 10 just to be sure. When they didn't come back, I figured that was my cue to take a break. It was just past 1 a.m. I grabbed my lunch and headed to the break room at the far end of the hallway. Sat down, pulled out my phone, started scrolling. Then, a noise. I froze. It wasn't loud, just out of place, like something shifting, something bumping against something else. I put my phone down, stared at the door, waited. Nothing. After about 30 seconds, I got up and stepped into the hallway. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I stood there, heart thudding, but when nothing else happened, I shook it off. Probably nothing. The building made weird noises sometimes. I went back to my food. Later, I checked the security office. No alerts, no flags. Everything looked fine. But for some reason, I felt off. I decided to make another round. Not because I was nervous exactly. Just curious. Outside, everything was still. Just the hum of streetlights, the occasional distant car. Inside, I walked the hallways, same as always. Usually, unless an alert popped up, I didn't go checking every inch of the place. Just a sweep in and out. But when I turned the last corner, I stopped. At the very end of the hallway was an old metal door. It led to a tiny stairwell with an emergency exit, one that hadn't been used in years. The security system didn't even monitor it. Instead, the company had slapped a giant padlock on it and called it a day. That padlock was on the ground, snapped clean in half. The door? Wide open. For a moment, all I could do was stare. Then slowly, I backed up, steadied my breathing, walked, did not run, back to the security office and pulled up the cameras. What I saw made my stomach drop. There, on the grainy black and white footage, was me, standing outside, watching the 2 men. And there they were, walking away. Only they didn't actually leave. The moment I turned my back, they circled around, came through the rear, snapped the lock clean off and slipped inside. They were in the building. While I was on my break, while I was sitting in that tiny room staring at my phone, while I was hearing that noise, one of them had been right on the other side of the door, maybe 2 feet away from me. And when I walked back outside to do another check, that's when they ran. On the playback, I watched them bolt, silent, fast, through the hallways, disappearing into the night. But that wasn't the part that got me. The part that got me was what they had on them. The cameras weren't perfect, but it was clear enough. Knives, long ones, maybe guns. They hadn't come to rob the place. They had been waiting. For me. I called the police and handed over the tapes, but nothing ever came of it. The footage was grainy, low quality, black and white ghosts shifting in and out of the frame. The men had covered their faces, just dark shapes in the night. The company reported that several hard drives had gone missing, entire files wiped clean. That seemed to shake them more than anything else. But to this day, no more information has surfaced about those men, or what they really wanted. I worked the night shift at a hospital. ER. Front desk. The kind of job where you see everything: gunshot wounds, overdoses, screaming mothers clutching lifeless babies. The whole human experience packed between the hours of midnight and dawn. This night started quiet. Too quiet. Just the usual trickle of people in and out, nurses moving like ghosts, doctors with tired eyes. I sat at the desk with my coworker, Amy, talking about nothing, just filling the silence. Then 2 a.m. rolled around and Amy went to the cafeteria for her break. And right after she left, like the universe had been waiting for it, the front door creaked open. A man stepped inside. Black hoodie, black jeans, greasy, unkempt hair. His face was half in shadow and there was something off about him. Something wrong. He didn't fidget, didn't shift his weight, didn't look around like most people do when they step into a place like this. He just stood there, staring at me with dark, unreadable eyes. "I'm looking for Hannah Smith," he said. I didn't remember the exact name, but it was a woman's name. And it didn't ring a bell. I checked the records, scanning quickly, feeling the weight of his eyes on me the whole time. Nothing. I told him so. He barely reacted, just gave the stiff nod and backed away, walking out as slow as he came. I glanced at the security guard across the room. We locked eyes. That guy was weird. Amy came back half an hour later. The rest of the shift was a slow, dragging nothing. When 4 a.m. hit, I grabbed my things, waved my goodbyes, and stepped out into the parking lot. Now, this wasn't some massive hospital, but the parking lot was ridiculously oversized. Workers were forced to park in the farthest corners, leaving the prime spots open for patients. So I walked, alone, past row after row of cars. The night air was still, the silence pressing. And suddenly, I thought of him. The man in the hoodie. I don't know why, but a cold feeling twisted in my stomach. The kind that makes your skin prickle, makes you speed up without realizing it. I walked faster, keys clenched tight, until I reached my car and slid inside. Locked the doors. Started the engine. The feeling didn't go away. I drove home on empty roads, the headlights carving a lonely path through the dark. The whole time, I felt it, that invisible weight pressing down on me like I wasn't alone. Like someone was watching. But every time I checked my mirrors, there was nothing. No headlights behind me. No figures lurking in the shadows. Just my own paranoia, right? I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. Sat there for a second listening to the quiet. Then I got out, hurried to my front door. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Sprinting. Coming fast. I barely had time to react before someone crashed into the porch, shaking the doorknob hard. It was locked. They stopped. Just stood there. And then, in a sickly sweet voice, the words came. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can you please open the door? I need help. Please, open the door." I didn't move, didn't breathe. I knew that voice. The man from the hospital. My hands fumbled for my phone, shaking as I dialed 911. As soon as I did, he bolted. I lunged for the peephole, just in time to see his dark figure vanishing down the road, swallowed by the night. When the cops arrived, they found something worse. Something that made my blood turn to ice. The back door of my car was open. He had been inside, the entire ride home, sitting there, breathing, just inches away from me. The cops pulled the hospital security footage, tracked him down a few days later. Some nobody. I had never seen him before in my life, but he had seen me. He had been watching me for weeks. And that night, he had been waiting for me to slip up, to leave my car unlocked, just once, just long enough for him to slip inside. Even when they caught him, he never admitted to anything, just kept repeating over and over, "I just wanted to talk to her." Like that made it okay. It's been a while now. Haven't heard anything about him since. Haven't seen his face. But every time I get in my car at night, every time I hear footsteps behind me, too close, too fast, I think about the breath on the back of my neck. And I wonder if he's still out there. I know, it's just a knock at the door. People get them all the time. But out here, at the end of a dead-end road, in a neighborhood where the loudest sound is usually the wind scraping tree branches against the windows, felt wrong. Like a violin string tuned too tight, waiting to snap. From where I sat on the couch, I was just barely out of sight. If whoever was at the door craned their neck just right, maybe they'd catch the edge of me. But I was hoping, praying that wasn't the case. Rain battered the house, a steady drumming on the roof, making everything feel even more claustrophobic. I swallowed hard. Who the hell would be knocking in weather like this? Then, like a lifeline, I remembered I had an Amazon package due today. Relief flooded through me, warm and dumb. Of course. I grabbed my phone, tapped open the app, fully expecting to see a notification that my order had been delivered. But the screen showed something else. Arriving by 5 p.m., it read. The relief turned to ice. The knock had come well before that. I sat there, My heart beat a steady thump 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 in my ears. A minute passed, maybe two. No follow-up knock, no muffled voice calling out. Just silence aside from the rain. Finally, I forced myself to move, just a little, enough to peek around the edge of the window. Nobody was there. My shoulders sagged. Stupid. I was being stupid. Maybe it had been a neighbor, lost, confused, or some kid playing a prank. That's what I told myself, and I almost believed it until I heard the footsteps. Soft, slow, squelching against the wet wood of the back deck. I froze. The sliding glass door was covered mostly by blinds, but there was a narrow gap, just enough to see through. Just enough for someone to see in. And that's when I saw him. A bald man, standing motionless in the rain. His face was smooth, slack, like a doll's left too long in the sun. He wore a black jacket, black pants, his entire body soaked through and dripping. He just stood there, staring at me. Then he reached for the door handle. It rattled. Locked. Thank God, it was locked. The relief lasted only a second before I realized something else. Glass wasn't exactly a fortress. If he wanted in, really wanted in, it wouldn't take much. My body moved before my mind caught up. I bolted down the hall, slammed myself into the bathroom, twisted the lock. My breathing came sharp and fast, too loud in the small space. And then, bang, I nearly screamed. The window. He was hitting the window. Hard. Hard enough that I knew he wasn't just trying to scare me. He was trying to break in. My hands scrambled for my phone. My fingers swiped, fumbling. But when I brought the screen up, no bars, no signal. And my charger? Left in the living room, right out there. With him. Another bang. Then another. The glass shuddered but didn't break. Yet, I had a choice. Stay put and hope for a miracle or run. The decision made itself. I ran. I burst from the bathroom, sprinted toward the couch, snatched my phone from where it sat wedged in the cushions. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. His expression unchanged, still blank, still staring. But his leg was raised, his foot poised to kick again. I dove back into the bathroom, slammed the door, locked it, and dropped onto the cold tiles. My hands shook as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Someone's trying to break into my house. Okay, I need you to stay calm. Crash. I sucked in a breath. Glass breaking. He was inside. My heart slammed against my ribs. He's in the house. Oh my God, he's in the house. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, as he moved toward the bathroom. The door handle jiggled. He was testing it. I crawled backward, pressing myself into the corner. The phone clutched tight to my chest. And then the banging started again. The door shuddered with every impact. He wasn't kicking anymore, he was using something heavier. A bat? A hammer? The force of it sent vibrations through the floor, up into my bones. I backed into the shower, as far away as I could get. Please hurry, I begged the operator. Another crash and the door frame groaned. It wasn't going to last much longer. Then footsteps. He was walking away, leaving. Why? A second later, I had my answer. Boom, boom, boom. Police! Open up! Chaos erupted. Shouting, pounding, commands barked in short, clipped bursts. I heard running, scuffling, more shouting. And then, finally, silence. I stayed where I was, curled up, shaking, until an officer knocked gently on the bathroom door. Miss? It's safe now. When I finally opened it, I saw them, 3 cops standing over the man, now face down on my living room floor, hands cuffed behind his back. His head was turned to the side, and for the first time, I saw something new in his expression. A smile. They hauled him up and let him out, but that smile stayed burned into my brain. Even now, long after the incident, I still see it in my dreams. And sometimes,